Nigeria's government says it's negotiating a ceasefire with jihadist group Boko Haram. It's the first time the government has publicly admitted to negotiating a peaceful end to nearly 10 years of conflict. Previous talks with the group have been focused on the release of hostages. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam has more from the Nigerian capital.
The admission that President Buhari's government is in talks with Boko Haram comes days after the release of more than 100 schoolgirls kidnapped from Dapchi Science and Technology College in the northeast. Shortly after their release, the government said back channels were used to secure the freedom of the girls. Thereafter, President Buhari extended unconditional amnesty to insurgents who gave up fighting to pave way for peace in the region that's been troubled for more than 9 years. But his goodwill gesture fell short of revealing an ongoing talks for a more comprehensive ceasefire with Boko Haram. Only days later, his information minister, Lai Mohammed, would go public with the secretive negotiations. Its complete departure from belligerent strategy both sides have fronted against each other for years. Even though the government had earlier expressed willingness to negotiate, nothing really got underway. So, what has changed?
Nigeria is at a stage where the humanitarian needs of the Northeast is probably one of the highest in the world. So yes, for the past 9 years, the government has received a tool. The political pressure on the government is as such right now that it has to act, it has to do something. On the side of the insurgents, when they started, they were just one group. They were active, they were able to take control of territory. Now we're in a situation where we're talking of about 3 groups factionalized. They are not in control of any territory. So either side, no side has been able to beat its chest to say we have achieved what we set out to achieve. So what next, if not a negotiation?
Until recently, Boko Haram controlled vast territories in the northeast, by some estimates equivalent to Rwanda. But most of that has been retaken, and the government has repeatedly said Boko Haram is defeated. The big problem for government is Boko Haram still carries on with bloody attacks on civilians and military installations. To this point, there's very little information on the negotiations, how far the negotiations have progressed, what the agenda is, or even who's mediating are still unknown. Boko Haram is split into 2 factions. To achieve sustainable peace, the government will have to convince both sides on this new idea of ceasefire.
The indications that discussions are on with both factions. Other indications that traction is being gained more on the Al-Barnawi faction than the Shekau faction. Now, if the government can achieve a ceasefire with both factions, then so yes, we're happier for it. Personally, I don't think the Shekau faction is ready for a ceasefire. I think it will probably be easier to achieve that with the Al-Barnawi faction. They are more organized, they seem to be more structured, and they are less indiscriminate in their violence than the Shekau faction. So I'm more hopeful with regard to a ceasefire with them. But even if it's just with them, it's a good beginning. It would now allow government to focus on just the other faction.
Nigerians will be heading for the general elections next year, and security in the northeast will be a big rallying point for politicians on either side. President Buhari's camp knows, despite the successes his administration has recorded against Boko Haram, it would be a lot easier to make a case if Boko Haram insurgency is out of the question. And that's largely why his administration will not overlook any avenue to resolve the conflict ahead of the elections. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Let's get you more now on these developments. I'm joined live from Lagos by Colonel Hassan Stanlabo. He is a retired military officer and security consultant. Colonel, thank you for joining us. What's your take on the ceasefire talks with Boko Haram? How likely is it that we will see a deal reached?
Oh, well, I'm quite optimistic that we shall be making a headway in securing a ceasefire with the insurgents. I'm very much aware that they are factionalized now into both the Shekau and Al-Barnawi factions. But I'm quite optimistic that the determination with which government is forging on, they'll be able to bring both parties on the discussion table, either separately or as a team.
Right, so you did mention about the fact that there is factionalism now within the militant group, and we do know that previous ceasefire talks have failed to go through or failed to succeed because of that. Has that changed now?
Say again, I didn't get you clearly.
Previous ceasefire talks have failed because of factionalism within Boko Haram. Has that changed now?
No, it hasn't changed. They are still factionalized, like I told you. Okay, and there is a possibility of government being able to make a headway in securing a ceasefire, either by discussing with each factions, or if luck is on our side, they might be able to bring both factions on the negotiating table through some other third parties, well-respected international platforms could assist in doing that. The International Red Cross and so on. They could do that. And of course, I think such discussions will even be a leeway for further discussions in respect of the Chibok girls, the balance of the Chibok girls that are to be released, and the little Christian girl whom we are still expecting from one of the Dapchi girls.
And the release of the Dapchi schoolgirls is the reason these talks are taking place. Is there a possibility that the Chibok girls will now also be released?
Yes, there is every possibility. I am aware that talks are already ongoing in respect of the release of the balance of the Chibok girls. What could make up the contents of such discussions, like you know, it's not meant for public domain. But I want to believe that our government will be able to secure the release of these girls. More so because the Buhari administration is very determined in ensuring that these girls are released. And not just being released in their complete numbers and alive.
All right, Colonel, we appreciate your time. Thank you for talking to us. Colonel Hassan Stanlabo, live for us in Lagos.